Hey everyone, we are diving into something pretty big today, the EU AI Act.
Yeah, it's been all over the news lately.
For good reason.
Yeah.
It seems like the EU is taking the lead when it comes to regulating AI. A lot of people are talking about it,
Yeah.
and I'm sure there's a lot of anxiety around it as well. So that's what we are going to try to break down today, what the EU AI Act actually means.
Yeah, I'm really interested to dig into it.
Especially for those who are interested in AI, because this could have ripple effects worldwide.
Absolutely.
So it's not just something that Europeans need to worry about. We'll be looking at an article that just came out a few days ago on November 16th, 2024.
Oh, wow. So it's really fresh.
Yes, it's called the EU AI Act, Pioneering Comprehensive AI Regulations and Global Standards.
Sounds like a pretty dense read.
It is, but we're going to unpack it together.
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting is that the EU is the first to do something like this.
Yeah, this is the first comprehensive law of its kind. A law that specifically targets AI. It's a big deal.
It's a bold move for sure. And the article actually talks about potential consequences for companies that don't comply.
Oh, really? So there are teeth to this law.
It seems so. But before we get into all of that, can you maybe just give us a quick overview of what the EU AI Act actually is?
Sure. Basically, it's a new set of rules, a new law that actually came into effect on August 1st of this year.
This year.
Yeah, 2024. It's basically a framework for how AI can and should be developed and used.
Across the entire EU.
Exactly, all 27 countries.
So it's not just some document that's sitting on a shelf somewhere. This is actually the law of the land right now.
It is, yeah.
The article also mentions this interesting risk-based approach that the Act uses.
Yes, it's a really smart approach.
Can you break that down for us a little?
Yeah, so instead of just saying, like, all AI is bad or all AI is good, they recognize that there are different levels of risk depending on how AI is used.
Okay, that makes sense.
So they've broken it down into these 4 categories.
Yeah.
Unacceptable risk, high risk, limited risk, and minimal risk.
So they've got the whole spectrum covered there.
Right. And this allows them to create targeted rules for each category.
Okay. Let's start with the scary one then, unacceptable risk.
Mm-hmm.
The article gives some pretty unsettling examples, the kind of stuff that, makes you think, are we living in an episode of Black Mirror?
Oh, absolutely. There's some really dystopian stuff out there. Things that the EU has basically said, nope, this is just too dangerous.
Like what? Give us an example.
Okay, so imagine a world where your access to services and opportunities is determined by an algorithm that's constantly judging your behavior.
Oh, like a social credit score.
Exactly. Like that Black Mirror episode Nosedive, where your social media score dictates your whole life. That's a big no-no under the AI Act. They're also banning any AI systems that try to manipulate people without them knowing.
Oh, wow, that's pretty creepy.
Yeah, and it's not just some future threat they're talking about. This technology exists, and they're serious about enforcing these bans, like starting February 2nd, 2025.
Next year.
Yeah, so the clock is ticking. Companies that develop or use these banned AI systems could face massive fines.
Like how massive?
Up to 35 million euros.
Wow.
Or 7% of their global turnover, whichever is higher.
So it's not just a slap on the wrist.
They mean business.
That's a very strong message. So we've talked about the extreme, the unacceptable risk AI. But what about the high-risk category? What falls under that?
So high-risk AI systems are those used in areas that could have a really significant impact on individuals or society.
Like what?
Think about things like healthcare. AI is being used to diagnose diseases, recommend treatments. There's also hiring processes, algorithms that are sifting through resumes.
Oh, right. And critical infrastructure.
Yeah. Controlling our power grids, transportation systems, things like that.
So the potential for harm is pretty high.
Right, but also the potential for good, which is why they're not banning these systems outright.
So how are they regulating them?
It's about making sure that this powerful technology is used responsibly. So the Act focuses on things like risk assessments, data quality, and human oversight.
So basically making sure that there are checks and balances in place.
Exactly. Developers of these high-risk systems, they have to prove that they've taken steps to identify and mitigate any potential harm.
It's like a safety net.
Yeah, you could say that. The data used to train these systems needs to be high quality, representative to avoid bias or discrimination.
Oh, that's so important.
And perhaps most importantly, there has to be human oversight to make sure that these systems are being used properly.
So human is still in the loop.
Yeah, a human needs to be able to intervene if things go wrong. And transparency is also key. Users need to be informed when they're interacting with a high-risk AI system.
That makes sense. So it's about making sure that AI is used ethically and responsibly. But some people might say that all this regulation is going to stifle innovation.
Right. It's a valid concern. But the EU has tried to address that. The goal here is to find a balance. They're not trying to shut down innovation.
Right.
They want to foster it, but they also want to protect fundamental rights.
So they're trying to walk that tightrope.
Exactly. They're saying, hey, you can still develop this powerful AI, but you need to do it in a way that respects people's rights.
Okay, so the EU has taken a strong stance on AI that poses significant risk.
Right.
But what about systems that are, well, less likely to cause harm?
Yeah, so the article also mentions these other two categories, limited risk and minimal risk.
Right. Can you give us some examples of what those might be?
Yeah, so limited risk might include things like chatbots. They can be misused, but the consequences are usually less severe.
Right, like maybe they give out wrong information or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or they could be used to spread spam. But the EU recognizes that these risks are generally manageable.
And minimal risk.
Minimal risk is the stuff that poses very little threat.
Yeah, we don't really need to worry about.
Right. Think of spam filters, for example.
They use AI.
Yeah, to protect us from unwanted emails. For these applications, the EU is basically taking a hands-off approach.
Okay. It seems like the EU has really thought this through,
Yeah,
categorizing AI and then creating specific rules.
definitely. It's a nuanced approach, which is good because AI is such a broad field.
It is. But this act is still pretty new, right?
Yeah, relatively.
Do companies have to comply with all of these regulations immediately?
The EU recognizes that this is a big shift for the industry, so they've actually provided a timeline for companies to comply.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so for the ban on unacceptable risk AI, that comes into full effect on February 2nd, 2025.
Wow, so that's coming up fast.
Yeah, but for the full set of regulations for high-risk systems, that won't be fully enforced until August 2027.
So companies have a bit of breathing room to get their house in order?
They do. They need time to adjust their practices, make sure their systems meet the requirements.
But what about companies outside of Europe? Like, this is an EU law. Does it apply to a tech company, say, based in the US?
That's a good question. And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, tell us more.
So even though it's an EU law, the AI Act has this kind of global reach.
So it's not just limited to companies within the EU.
Right. So any company that wants to sell AI products or services in the EU, regardless of where they are based, has to comply with this act.
So yes, even a US-based company needs to pay attention.
If they want to do business in Europe, they do.
It seems like the EU is setting the standard then.
It is. They're kind of forcing companies to think about these issues and potentially creating a blueprint that other countries might follow.
So even though it's a European law, it has global implications.
Absolutely. And it'll be interesting to see how this influences AI development and regulation around the world in the coming years.
Yeah, are we going to see similar laws popping up in other countries?
I think it's definitely a possibility. The EU has kind of started this global conversation about AI regulation.
And it's a conversation we need to have.
It is. This is just the beginning.
It's such a big topic. But I think before we get too ahead of ourselves, we should probably unpack some of the specifics of the AI Act a bit further.
Yeah, good idea. Let's dive into some of the details and see how it actually plays out in the real world.
I'm with you on that. Let's dig in.
You know, one thing that I find really interesting is how this AI Act kind of connects with other laws that are already out there.
Oh, yeah, like what's
Like the GDPR.
Yeah, the General Data Protection Regulation.
Right. That was a big deal for data privacy.
Huge. So how do these two regulations, the AI Act and GDPR,
Yeah.
how do they work together when it comes to AI?
It's like they're two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
GDPR, it's all about protecting people's personal data,
Right.
while the AI Act wants to make sure that AI is developed and used in a way that respects fundamental rights, which includes privacy.
So they complement each other.
They do.
Yeah.
But there can also be some overlap, even potential conflicts.
So companies really have to be careful,
Yeah, they have to think about both of these regulations.
navigate this complex web.
Exactly. Can you give us an example of how this might actually play out in the real world?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, let's think about AI systems used in hiring.
Okay, yeah, we talked about that earlier.
Right. So those systems, they often rely on a ton of personal data.
To make decisions about job candidates.
Exactly. And under GDPR, companies have to be really clear about how they're using that data.
And get people's consent.
Right. And then the AI Act comes in and adds this extra layer.
Okay.
It says, hey, you need to make sure these AI systems are fair.
Don't discriminate.
Right. No bias.
So companies kind of have to walk this tightrope.
Yeah, they need to get enough data to train effective AI.
But they also have to protect privacy and ensure fairness.
Exactly. It's a real balancing act.
It is. And it sounds really challenging, to be honest.
It is, and this is just one example.
Right, just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, there are so many ways that AI Act and GDPR interact
So companies really need to understand both.
to make sure that their AI practices are, squeaky clean.
Compliant on all fronts. It seems like the EU is really setting a high bar.
Yeah, they're definitely leading the way when it comes to responsible AI.
But some critics might say that this approach, it's a bit too much,
Oh yeah, I've heard that too.
too heavy-handed, that it could actually stifle innovation.
That's a real concern. It's a debate that's happening all over the world, not just in Europe.
It is. It's tough because, on one hand, we want to encourage innovation.
We want to see AI being used to benefit society, to solve problems.
Right, but on the other hand, we don't want to just let it run wild.
We need to be mindful of the risks, make sure it doesn't cause harm.
So how do we find that balance?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't think there's an easy answer.
What do you think is the best way forward?
I think communication is key. We need open and ongoing dialogue between policymakers, tech companies, researchers, the public.
Everyone needs to be involved.
Yeah, we need to work together to figure out how to navigate this new landscape, find solutions that strike the right balance.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like we can't shut down innovation out of fear,
Right.
but we also can't ignore the potential risks.
It's about harnessing the power of AI.
For good.
Exactly. While also putting safeguards in place to prevent misuse.
So it's all about finding that sweet spot
Yeah, that's the goal.
where we can have the benefits of AI without the downsides.
That's it. And I think the EU AI Act is a really important step in the right direction.
It's a framework that can evolve as our understanding of AI grows.
Exactly. It's a living document.
So it's not set in stone.
No. It can adapt as we learn more about AI, about its capabilities, its limitations.
Yeah, makes sense. You mentioned earlier that other countries are watching this closely.
They are.
Do you think we'll see more laws like this popping up around the world?
I think it's definitely possible.
Like a domino effect.
Yeah, maybe. The EU has kind of set a precedent,
And other countries may feel pressured to follow suit.
especially if they want to stay competitive.
It's like, hey, if the EU is doing it, we should probably think about it too.
Yeah.
Something like that.
But ultimately, wouldn't that be a good thing?
It could be. If it leads to more responsible AI development globally.
It's like raising the bar for everyone.
Exactly. If we can create this global framework for AI governance, one that puts human rights first, that would be amazing.
Yeah, it would be a win for everyone.
It would. It would help make sure that AI is used for the benefit of humanity.
Not just for profit or power.
Right. It's about making sure that AI is a force for good in the world.
I like that. It's a vision worth striving for.
It is.
But even with all the good intentions, regulating AI globally,
It's a huge undertaking.
it is. Are there any things we should watch out for? Any potential pitfalls?
Definitely. I think one of the biggest risks is ending up with this fragmented regulatory landscape,
Oh, what do you mean by that?
where different countries have totally different rules.
Conflicting rules, yeah.
Exactly. It would be confusing for companies.
They wouldn't know which rules to follow.
Right. It could stifle innovation.
So that's something we need to avoid. We do. We need to find a way to promote global cooperation.
Harmonize these efforts.
Exactly. Make sure everyone's on the same page.
Do you think that's possible?
I think it has to be.
Okay.
I mean, the challenges of AI, they're too big for any one country to solve alone.
It's a global issue that requires a global response.
Exactly. And luckily, there are organizations that are already working on this.
Oh, really? Like who?
The United Nations, the OECD, the World Economic Forum.
Those are some big players.
They are. They're all developing ethical guidelines, principles for AI.
So there's hope for a unified approach.
There is. It's not going to be easy, but it's necessary.
This feels like a turning point.
It does.
The decisions we make now about AI are going to have consequences for generations to come.
Absolutely. And it's not just up to policymakers or tech companies to figure this out.
Right.
This is everyone's responsibility.
We all have a role to play.
Yeah, we need to have these conversations,
Wow.
weigh the benefits and risks of AI, and work together to make sure it serves humanity.
Powerful words. So for our listeners who are trying to make sense of all this,
What should they take away from this conversation?
what are the key takeaways?
I think the main takeaway is that the EU AI Act is a big deal.
It is.
It has the potential to change how we think about and regulate AI globally.
It's like a wake-up call.
It is. It's a reminder that we can't just sit back and let AI develop on its own.
You need to be proactive.
Yeah, we need to shape its development, make sure it's used for good.
So this is just the beginning of the conversation.
It is. And it's a conversation that everyone needs to be a part of.
We all need to be informed and engaged.
Absolutely. The future of AI is in our hands.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about this huge new law, the EU AI Act.
And its potential impact worldwide.
Yeah, how it could set a global standard.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, for the average person listening,
Someone who's not like a CEO or a lawmaker.
right, why should they care about all of this?
That's a really good question. It's easy to think this is all very high-level stuff.
Yeah, abstract algorithms and regulations.
But it actually affects all of us. So think about how much AI is already a part of our daily lives.
It is everywhere.
It really is. The recommendations you see on Spotify or Netflix,
Oh, right.
social media feeds, the way they're curated.
Even just using Google Maps to get around.
Yeah, all of that is powered by AI. And this AI Act, it's trying to make sure that these systems are fair and transparent.
So it's not just manipulating us without us realizing it.
Exactly. You know, showing us things based on our biases or discriminating against us in subtle ways. And it's not just those everyday things either.
Okay, what else?
Think about healthcare.
Oh, right.
AI is increasingly being used to diagnose diseases, recommend treatments.
So this law could have a big impact there.
Yeah, the AI Act wants to make sure those systems are safe, reliable, that they're not going to worsen existing inequalities.
And what about in the job market?
Oh, that's another big one. AI tools are already being used to screen resumes.
Right, to decide who even gets an interview.
Exactly. And the Act wants to prevent those tools from being biased, from limiting opportunities for certain groups of people.
So it's really about protecting people
It is.
from potential harms caused by AI.
Yeah, whether it's manipulation or unfair treatment or even threats to our safety.
So it's about keeping people safe and making sure that AI is used ethically
Exactly. It's about putting people at the center of AI development.
so that it enhances our lives, not, makes things worse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We want AI to be a force for good, and this law is a step in that direction.
And the article we discussed focuses on the EU, but you mentioned earlier that other countries are paying attention.
They are. It sparked this global discussion.
Do you think that other countries are going to follow the EU's lead?
I think it's definitely possible.
Yeah.
The EU has kind of thrown down the gauntlet here.
It's a challenge to the rest of the world.
It is, to say, hey, we need to start thinking about these issues seriously.
So we might see a waves of new AI laws popping up.
Yeah, maybe, but I don't think there's going to be a one-size-fits-all solution here.
Okay, well, you.
Every country has its own unique context,
Cultural, political.
economic. So they might approach AI regulation in different ways.
So there's no easy answer.
Not really, but I think what's really important is that we have this conversation globally.
To share ideas and learn from each other's experiences.
Exactly, because the challenges of AI, they're too big for any one country to tackle alone.
The global issue.
And it requires a global response. Luckily, there are already organizations working on this, like the UN, the OECD.
So there's some hope for collaboration.
There is. It's going to be a long road, but I think it's possible to find a path forward that benefits everyone.
Well, it seems like we've reached the end of our deep dive here. But I feel like this is just the beginning of the conversation.
It really is.
This EU AI Act is a major development, and it's going to have ripple effects for years to come.
I think so, too. It's a wake-up call for all of
To
us
start paying attention.
to start thinking critically about the role of AI in our lives.
Because ultimately, the future of AI is in our hands.
It is. It's up to us to shape it, to make sure that it's used for good.
So let's stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking questions.
Exactly. This is a conversation that we all need to be a part of.
And on that note, we'll wrap things up here. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the EU AI Act. We hope you learned something.
And that you'll continue to explore this fascinating and rapidly changing world of AI.
Until next time, stay curious.
Yeah.